Jim, thanks for taking the time. It's fun to visit with you, and the idea of these is really to have people go back and learn who you are and what your experiences in the field were, as well as all the things you've accomplished. So let's start at the beginning. What's your first memory, or how did you first get introduced to echo?
Yeah, it's interesting. I was just talking to Jordy Strom, who's echocardiographer at Beth Israel, and I was reminding him that I did my medicine and surgical clerkship at Beth Israel. And my first real memory of echo was meeting Pat Cum, who was the head of the echo lab there. And in those days, which was like 1979 or so, echo was M mode. She didn't have a 2D machine, just long strips of M mode. And, she would show this little bump and that little bump and all that. And the only lesson I took from that is the last thing I wanted to do in my life was be the echo guy. And thankfully, by the time, my career choices came around, there was a lot more to echo. So that's really where it all started.
I can remember back, when I went to Stanford, we had M modes and we had apex cardiograms and phonocardiograms and carotids and all that stuff. And when we got the first 2D, even the surgeons said, "No, that's something I can believe in. It's not those wiggly." So when did you and 2D echo get
2D
married?
really came in. I did there was a time where all I wanted to be was a little country cardiologist. So I was Mass General for my residency, and then for fellowship, I went to Burlington, Vermont, which had a great clinical program, and I learned a lot. And there were two guys there, Tom Gibson and Bert Tabakin, who were the echo guys, and they were both passionate about it. They had 2D, they had Doppler. I don't think we had color Doppler at that time. That was just before a Moto and the big machine, refrigerator-sized echo machine. But it was enough to really hook me on it.
Right.
And I went to Ned Wayman and said, "I'd like to come down and do a year of echo with you, and then I'll return and be a country cardiologist up in Vermont." And Ned, infinitely wise, said, "If you want to come for 1 year, you need to write a grant, bring your own money, and I'll let you sit in the lab. If you want to come for 2 years, I'll fund you 100%. Suddenly, 2 years,
2 years sounded good.
Seemed like a better deal to me, and he was absolutely right. You can't do anything in a year. In 2 years, I was hooked, and the rest is history.
You've been involved in many of the technical developments in the field. Tell me, as you look back, sort of what stands out to you, and how were you involved?
Yeah, there have been so many, and it's been very exciting. Let's just start with color Doppler. I remember very well sitting with Jerry Wilkins, great New Zealand cardiologist, and Chris Chung, great Australian cardiologist, when we were all fellows in Ned's lab. And Ned said, "I need a color flow gorilla. I need someone who's going to take color flow on, and we're going to figure it out." And so Jerry, who's, not a man to let stand on ceremony there, said, "We're going to go to the cath lab and use a power injector and make jets in buckets of dog's blood and see what they look like." And we did that, and that really was the start of understanding that regurgitant jets follow the principle of jet momentum. So the faster the jet, the bigger the jet for the same size regurgitant leak and things like that. And we really started trying to quantify valvular regurgitation using PISA, using momentum, things like that. And that's really carried forward to today, where we have three-dimensional imaging and things like that. 3D was very early in Ned's lab. They were using like little crickets, little acoustic clickers on a transducer that they would
Right.
move around
Right.
and take images of.
Right.
And Frank Floxkampf, who's now a cardiologist in Uppsala, Sweden, he was the fellow assigned to do that. And he came up with one 3D tracing of a ventricle there. And I said, so Frank, does this take hours or days or weeks to produce one of
Right.
those? He said, months.
Yeah.
And that's obviously made huge progress today. It's real time.
And
It's stunning.
you've been integral and really in strain imaging.
Yes.
How did you get excited about strain?
Well, strain, it sort of grows out of my interest in mechanics.
Right.
And in college, I was a physics and applied math major, and came very close to becoming an astrophysicist, but saw the light and figured out that in cardiology I could kind of have as much fun and have a whole clinical life and not spend my life living on top of a volcano in Peru or something like that. And but strain was very impractical back around 2000. It was done with tissue Doppler, and it was just tedious. And yes, you could get some research publications. It was absolutely clear this was going nowhere. And then around 2003, we were working closely with GE, and a group, sort of a renegade group of GE engineers out of Haifa had come up with Speckle Tracking. And I took a look at this, 2003, I remember, and I looked at this, I said, this is gonna change everything, because this is practical. You get 3 standard apical views, put them together, you can get a bullseye out of it. You can get one number that characterizes ventricular deformation. And so it was very, very clear that this was going to be something that could have clinical value. Now, fast forward about 8 years when I'm president, and the problem with strain was that there were, if you compared GE to Philips to Siemens to Toshiba, it was like a shotgun blast. And it just, yes, maybe it was a significant correlation, but it was not a useful correlation. And so that really was one of the main developments of my presidency,
Right.
was working closely with Luigi Badano, who was EACVI president at the time, to form the strain task force for harmonization. And, I think we made some good progress on that. We got, standardized what part of the wall are we quantifying,
Right.
when's the beginning of systole, when's the end of systole, things like that. And at least for GLS, I think it's worked very well.
You were the 22nd president, 2011 to 2012, and as I mentioned earlier, I read your exit interview, your last president's page, and you had a lot of things in there. It was hail and hail, not hail and farewell, or whatever you said at the thing there. But you certainly highlighted the strain, the sort of the strain thing that you just talked about, which I think is really important. You did some other interesting things, education with board review, and you were the galloping gourmet of the during your
Yes.
presidency. I mean, your blogs were interesting, but tell us during what were the major issues that as you look back, or things you thought about that were of concern to the field or the society, and things that you accomplished?
Well, there were a lot of, challenging issues that came up during that time. Actually, leading into my presidency was the whole black box warning on contrast, and working closely with Roberto and Sanjeev and Tom and Bill Zogby, who were leading into me. We, I think, came up with a very strong response to that, and more importantly, generated a lot of data
Right.
that proved that contrast was very safe. even in the circumstances that had concerned the FDA. And so I think we sort of saved contrast, and the black box has gotten smaller and smaller and smaller over time. I remember there was something called Choosing Wisely, which the ABIM had come up with, where, you know, there obviously are non-indicated studies that are being done, and so we were asked to identify some situations where an echo or a stress echo should not be done, and there are obviously situations where that just is inappropriate. You know, and lots of fun on the international front. You know,
You did a lot. I mean, you know, as I said, I was being facetious, but I mean it. It was interesting to follow not only your president's pages and things, but your blogging, because you took us to meetings.
Yeah.
And also took us to dinner.
Exactly.
I thought, I mean, I felt like I was going to have to, you know, take Pepto-Bismol after reading their blogs. But
yeah, no,
but you did do a lot with really creating a tremendous international camaraderie.
Yes. Yeah, and I think that's, you know, if there's one thing in my echo life that has really been a joy, it's that through training people from outside the U.S. and then traveling outside the U.S., and often those are kind of one and the same. You just meet so many fantastic people around the world, and you've learned to respect the differences, but also to recognize the similarities. And, you know, whether it's China, whether it's I think we were in Budapest for EACVI.
You were
that year,
yep.
And you know, seeing the history of Hungary and how it had all changed with the onset of communism, the fall of communism, and all of that. It was fascinating.
You've done a fabulous job of representing the field and representing the ASE. I ask you about 2 or 3 more things quickly here. You've had a really fascinating career with NASA and Echo in space. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, that's been very exciting and very rewarding, and started, you know, in like the mid-90s, I think, was where this first really came up, and we came to understand that there was an opportunity, sort of a call for proposals for medical imaging on the space station.
Right.
And there were people at the time that said, oh yes, we'll put an MRI machine on the space station. It's like 3 Tesla magnet space station doesn't sound like a good idea. And clearly ultrasound was the only practical approach to this. And I recall having how you would get the images back down to Earth was a big issue. And they had this like crazy scheme where, yes, we're going to make videotapes and put them in little capsules with retro rockets and drop them down to Earth.
Me.
And it's like, I said, we have this thing called the DICOM standard. Everything's digitized, and send it up to the geosynchronous satellites, bring it back down to Earth. And, you know, that basically was the winning bid to get my first grant from NASA. Worked very closely with the Lockheed engineers that took an ATL HD 5000, right, and they call it flybridize it. They harden it against space, which involves, you know, it has to be vibration proof, and it also has to be very good at cooling itself, because there's no convection in space. Heat doesn't rise. It just sits where it's generated. So you need about twice as strong a fan to pull air through it and keep it cool. And then Ben Levine and I have done a series of experiments looking at the effects of space flight on the cardiovascular system.
What's it do?
Well, initially you have all the blood that's down in the legs that gravity keeps down there comes up into your heart. And actually some work that Ben and Drew Gaffney had done earlier with CVP lines in the right atrium there showed that you sort of get negative compliance of the heart, meaning that the heart gets bigger, but the pressure, the diastolic pressure inside the heart goes down because you've essentially lost the pericardial restraint. You know, when the heart's lying in the pericardium, it sort of gets restrained a little bit just from its own weight. Take away the weight, it kind of floats up. And so you get a lot of blood into the heart, causes a little stretch in the atrium there. You diurese over the next few days. You come out a couple of units lower in blood volume, and by the time you come back down to earth, you've got the risk that you're going to be very orthostatic because you're underloaded. You may have had some LV mass regression up there. And essentially what we've discovered is that the only cure for that is very vigorous exercise, like 2 or 3 hours a day of exercise to really preserve cardiac mass, and then do something to volume load yourself a bit before you come back down.
I mean, it's fascinating, very exciting, and you've certainly propelled Echo into playing a vital role there. Jim, where's the field going to go over the next 5 to 10 years?
Oh, I think the field is still very rich and still developing in ways that we can't even imagine. I think there are still technical improvements in that transducers are getting higher sensitivity, lower noise, so we will be able to pull more out of the ultrasound spectrum. And then I think artificial intelligence is going to play a huge role, which you're quite aware of, that I think, as it develops, it will just sort of be embedded in a lot of our daily lives in the Echo Lab. Already, I think there's a lot of AI going on that we're not even aware of. When, you get some automated 3D analysis packages and things like that. That's all based on AI, but it's going to be even more than that moving forward, be integrated with the electronic medical records so you can include all sorts of non-echo parameters in that, and I think it's going to just become more and more powerful.
The big pushback is it's going to take my job away. That's been always the push that people say with AI, but you're right. I mean, it can play a quality role and a simplification of our work role, and can it?
It's not going to take your job away. It's going to make your job easier. It's going to allow you to do more in less time with greater precision and more insight into what's going on with your patients. There may be some echoes that are so normal that basically the AI says, this looks okay, just look at these views, and if you agree, we can move on. You spend your time then on the very complicated ones, lots of hemodynamic changes, things like that, so you really devote your efforts where they'll do the most good.
Finally, you've had a fabulous career and made a lot of tremendous contributions. Do you have any noteworthy memories? Okay, and I don't want a long list, but of events, people that you've been involved with. You mentioned Ned and a whole bunch of people, but people or experiences. If I said give me a couple.
You want a short list, short sample from a very long list. I'll say a couple of Ned's maxims. Ned Wayman, was really very critical in my development, probably my one true mentor here. And, he had advice like, ask important questions and answer them carefully. Okay, I can't argue with that. I think some of my travel has been, I grew up in Oklahoma. I didn't have a passport until I was 26. And the idea that I've now been to, I think, 80 countries and been all over Asia and South America and Europe, Africa.
It's phenomenal, isn't it? It's a phenomenal opportunity.
Wonderful opportunity, and it gives you so much insight into sort of the world politics, and you just realize how alike we all are, and how we just need to sort out our differences and move forward.
Yeah, we're fortunate to have been in a field like this with the people and the developments, and certainly you played a key role in that. Jim, thanks very much. I could have listened to you talking about space for quite a while. It's fabulous. Thanks for all your contributions.
Thank you, Randy. Great seeing you.